I first noticed the camera on a Friday night, a little after 11 p.m., when the building was supposed to be asleep. It wasn't new. I'd installed it myself 6 months earlier after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. Small, cheap, mounted above the door inside my apartment, angled just enough to catch the hallway whenever the door opened. It sent alerts to my phone whenever motion was detected. That night, my phone buzzed while I was sitting on the couch, half watching something I had already forgotten. Motion detected at 11:42 p.m. I frowned and muted the TV. I hadn't moved. The door was still locked. The deadbolt was in place. I could see it from where I was sitting. I opened the app. The video loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, like it didn't want to be seen. The footage showed my apartment door opening from the inside. And then me. Not a blur. Not a shadow. Me. Clear as day. Same hoodie. Same jeans. Same stupid slouch in my shoulders. I watched myself step into the hallway, pause like I was listening for something, then gently pull the door closed behind me. The lock clicked. The video ended. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, then looked up at the door across the room. It hadn't moved. I got up slowly. Every sound in the apartment suddenly too loud. My breathing, the soft hum of the fridge, the distant rattle of pipes in the walls. I crossed the living room and pressed my palm against the door. Cold, solid, locked. I checked the deadbolt. Still engaged. I replayed the video. Again, I watched myself leave. My chest tightened. I laughed once short and sharp, because that's what you do when your brain refuses to accept what it's seeing. Some kind of glitch. Old footage. Delay. Anything. I checked the timestamp. 11:42 p.m. It was 11:44 now. I hadn't left the couch. My phone buzzed again. Motion detected at 11:45 p.m. this time. The footage showed the hallway outside my apartment, and someone standing directly in front of my door, waiting to be let back in. I didn't open the door. I stood there with my hand hovering inches from the handle, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the low hum of the building, the distant traffic outside, the faint electrical buzz from the hallway lights bleeding through the doorframe. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. Familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I stepped back, careful not to make the floor creak. The breathing stopped instantly, like whoever was outside knew I'd moved. I looked down at my phone again, replaying the footage frame by frame. The way I had paused in the hallway. The way I had tilted my head, listening. I do that when I'm nervous. I locked the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, phone clutched in both hands. Every few minutes, I checked the camera feed. Nothing moved. No alerts. The hallway remained empty. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I woke up, the sun was already bleeding weak light through the curtains. My phone lay face down beside me. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Then I flipped the phone over. 3 missed alerts, all between 2:11 and 2:18 a.m. The first showed my front door opening from the outside this time. The second showed me stepping back into the apartment. The third showed the door closing. I checked the timestamps again and again, hoping to find a glitch, a skipped second, anything that would let me breathe. There was none. What unsettled me most wasn't the footage. It was the way I moved in it. Relaxed, familiar, like I belonged here more than I did. I spent Saturday testing reality in small, pathetic ways. I marked the inside of the door with a pen. I stacked a chair against it. I placed a glass on the handle so it would fall if the door moved. By noon, the camera had recorded me leaving twice. The glass never fell. The chair never moved. The pen mark stayed perfect. At 3:07 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, the footage didn't show the door at all. It showed my living room. The angle was wrong, lower than it should be, as if the camera had been adjusted. The couch was empty. The TV was off. And then, from the edge of the frame, I leaned toward the camera. Too close. Too slow. I watched my own face study the lens, eyes calm, almost curious. Then my mouth moved. No sound came through the video. But I knew exactly what I was saying. You're not supposed to be watching. The feed cut to black. Behind me, in the apartment, something shifted. Not a sound. A presence. And for the first time since Friday night, I was certain of one thing: I wasn't the only one inside anymore. I didn't sleep after that. I lay on the bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the apartment breathe. That's the only way I can describe it. Not sounds exactly, no footsteps, no whispers, but a sense of rhythm, like the space itself had settled into a pattern that didn't include me. Every so often, I checked the camera feed. It stayed dark. That worried me more than the alerts. By Saturday night, I stopped turning lights on. I moved slowly, deliberately, afraid that sudden motion might attract attention. I ate standing up, back against the wall, eyes on the hallway. My reflection in the microwave door looked unfamiliar, too pale, too alert, like someone waiting for instructions. At 8:14 p.m., the camera came back online by itself. No alert, no sound. The feed showed the hallway again. Empty. Perfectly still. I watched for a long time, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. The silence stretched until it felt deliberate, staged. Then, without warning, the image shifted. The camera angle changed. It was now pointing directly at my door from the hallway. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't opened the door. The timestamp read 8:16 p.m. I was standing in the living room at that exact moment, my phone trembling in my hand. The door opened. I didn't come out right away. Whoever it was lingered just inside the frame, close enough that the camera picked up the texture of fabric, the edge of a sleeve identical to mine. Then he stepped forward. Me, but not the version I recognized. His posture was straighter, his movements slower, more deliberate. He didn't glance around like someone entering their own apartment. He looked down the hallway instead, as if checking whether anyone was watching. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't aggressive. It was patient. He stepped back inside and closed the door. The feed ended. I stood frozen, my body buzzing with something close to panic but heavier, duller, like my instincts had been smothered. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door in front of me. It hadn't moved. The lock was still engaged. I backed away until I felt the wall against my spine. My own apartment felt wrong now, too symmetrical, too quiet, like a replica built from memory rather than experience. From somewhere inside the walls, I heard a sound. Not footsteps. Not knocking. Something settling into place. I whispered, "I'm here," without knowing why. From the other side of the apartment, very softly, something answered, "I know." The reply echoed in my head long after the sound itself disappeared. "I know." It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It carried no emotion at all. That was what made it unbearable. It sounded like a fact, something already settled. I stayed where I was for a long time, pressed against the wall, afraid that if I moved, the space would rearrange itself again. My apartment no longer felt like something I occupied. It felt like something that was tolerating me. I checked the camera feed once more. It was back inside my apartment now. The angle was wrong again, tilted slightly downward, as if whoever adjusted it had been taller or wanted a better view of the room. The feed showed the living room empty, the couch untouched, the air perfectly still, and yet something felt crowded. I noticed details I didn't remember setting up. The throw pillow on the couch was straightened. The remote was centered on the table instead of pushed off to one side where I always left it. My shoes by the door were aligned heel to heel. Corrected. I walked into the frame slowly, testing whether the camera would react. It didn't send an alert. It didn't acknowledge me at all. I stood there, staring directly into the lens, waiting for recognition. Nothing. Then I saw it. A faint shadow behind me in the reflection of the dark TV screen. Not shaped like a person. More like an absence where one shouldn't be. I turned around. The apartment was empty. When I looked back at the feed, the shadow was gone. Instead, I was no longer centered in the frame. I was standing off to the side, partially cropped out, like I wasn't the subject anymore. That's when it occurred to me slowly, reluctantly, that the camera might not be watching for me. It might be watching me leave. My phone vibrated again. No alert this time. Just the live feed updating. The door was open, and I wasn't inside the apartment anymore. I watched myself step into the hallway, pause, and look back toward the camera toward me with an expression I didn't recognize as fear or guilt. It was relief. The door closed. The feed cut. Inside the apartment, the air felt lighter, less tense, like something had finally settled. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the wall, my breathing shallow and controlled. Somewhere deep inside, a thought surfaced that I didn't want to finish. If the camera only shows what leaves, then what does that make me now? The building creaked softly, as if responding, and for the first time since Friday night, I wasn't sure whether I was being watched anymore or kept. By Sunday morning, I had stopped checking the time. Not because I didn't care, but because time had stopped behaving like something I could trust. My phone said it was 9:12 a.m., yet the light coming through the window felt wrong, too dim, like the day hadn't fully decided to begin. The building outside was silent in a way that didn't belong to morning. I stayed on the floor longer than I meant to, my back against the wall, listening to my own breathing until even that felt intrusive. The apartment was calm now. Too calm. The tension that had filled it the night before was gone, replaced by something smoother, more deliberate, like satisfaction. When I finally stood, my legs felt weak, unfamiliar. I moved through the apartment slowly, noticing how little resistance there was. Doors opened easily. The air felt thin, stretched. Every surface looked slightly cleaner than it should have been, as if someone had prepared the space. For who? I didn't know. I checked the camera again. The feed was steady, clear, perfect. It showed my front door from the inside, centered precisely in the frame. The angle was ideal, professional even. I couldn't remember ever setting it up that way. I waved at the camera. Nothing happened. No alert. No recognition. I stepped closer until my face filled the screen on my phone. For a moment, there was a delay, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. My movements felt out of sync, like the feed was deciding whether I belonged in it. Then the image corrected itself. I was centered again, but my reflection looked calmer than I felt. My eyes weren't wide. My mouth wasn't tense. I looked settled, like someone who had already made a decision. I backed away. The feed didn't follow. A knock came from the hallway. Soft, polite, almost careful. I froze. The knock came again, slower this time, as if whoever was outside understood that I was listening. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. My phone vibrated in my hand. Motion detected 9:47 a.m. The live feed showed the hallway. And me, standing outside my door, facing it directly, close enough that the camera picked up the details of my face, the faint shadow under my eyes, the slight tilt of my head I give when I'm thinking. He raised his hand, knocked once. Then he leaned forward and rested his forehead against the door, exactly where my head would be if I opened it. His lips moved. I didn't hear it through the feed, but the words arrived anyway, settling into my thoughts like they'd always been there. You've been inside long enough. The handle on the door turned slowly. From the inside, the lock began to slide back, and I realized, with a quiet, sinking certainty, that whatever was happening wasn't trying to force its way in. It was waiting for me to leave. I didn't let the lock finish turning. I lunged for the door and slammed my palm against it, forcing the deadbolt back into place. The sound was louder than I expected, sharp and final, echoing through the apartment like I had made a declaration instead of a decision. On the other side of the door, the knocking stopped. Not abruptly, considerately. I stood there with my forehead pressed to the wood, my hand still wrapped around the lock, waiting for anger, for force, for something that would justify my fear. Nothing came. The silence stretched until it began to feel deliberate, almost kind, like the building was giving me time to reconsider. I backed away slowly, every step measured, afraid that turning my back on the door might invite something to follow. The apartment felt larger now, stretched in ways I couldn't explain. The hallways seemed longer. The distance between furniture felt wrong, like I was walking through a memory of my home instead of the real thing. I checked the camera. The hallway feed was gone. The camera now showed my bedroom. I hadn't placed it there. I hadn't moved it. Yet the angle was intimate low, near the corner of the ceiling, capturing the bed, the closet door, the narrow strip of wall where the light fell in the evenings. The room was empty. I hadn't been. I stood in the living room, staring at a feed that insisted otherwise. The bed was neatly made. The chair I dropped my clothes on the night before was pushed in. The space looked untouched, unoccupied. Prepared? A pressure built behind my eyes, not panic. Not yet, but something heavier. Recognition. The sense that I was watching a version of events that had already been agreed upon. My phone buzzed again. No notification. Just movement. The bedroom door in the feed opened slowly inward. Someone stepped inside. Me. But there was something wrong in the way he entered. No hesitation. No scanning of the room. He moved like someone returning to a place they trusted completely. He sat on the edge of the bed. Waited. I realized then that I was holding my breath. In the feed, he looked up, directly at the camera, and spoke without sound. I didn't need to hear it. You can't stay where you're not being recorded. Behind me, the bedroom door creaked. I turned. The door was open. I hadn't moved. The apartment felt different now, less resistant, less solid. Like it was slowly aligning itself with the version of events I was refusing to participate in. The walls didn't feel hostile. They felt patient, inviting. I took one step backward. The floor didn't creak. I took another. The light in the living room dimmed slightly, not enough to notice all at once, but enough that I felt it rather than saw it. I understood then that the camera wasn't the cause. It was the proof. The building wasn't replacing me. It was correcting a mistake. And the longer I stayed inside, the more out of place I became. By the time Sunday afternoon arrived, I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard a sound from outside the building. No cars. No voices. No distant sirens. It felt as though the world had stepped away and closed the door behind it. I sat on the floor of the living room, back against the couch, watching the camera feed without blinking. The screen no longer felt like a window. It felt like a mirror that refused to show me what I needed. The feed showed the hallway again. Empty. Too empty. The lighting was warmer than the harsh fluorescence I remembered, softer, like the building was trying to be welcoming. The door to my apartment stood closed, centered in the frame, perfectly aligned. As if it mattered. I checked my phone's gallery, scrolling back through the earlier recordings. The first video of me leaving. The second of me returning. The later ones where the timing stopped making sense. Something was missing. Not footage. Context. The videos no longer felt strange. They felt familiar. Like reminders of something I had already accepted once and then forgotten. I tried to remember what I had felt the first time I saw myself leave, but the emotion wouldn't come. The fear had dulled, smoothed out, replaced by something quieter. Resignation, maybe, or recognition. I stood and walked toward the door, stopping just short of touching it. My reflection stared back at me from the peephole, distorted, stretched, wrong. For a moment, I had the unsettling impression that the reflection was clearer than I was. "You already did this," I murmured, unsure who I was talking to. The building answered with silence. Behind me, the camera feed changed again. No alert. No warning. It now showed the inside of the apartment from an angle I had never seen before, high up, near the ceiling, capturing everything at once. The couch, the door, the space where I stood frozen in the middle of the room. I was in the frame, but I wasn't the focus. The focus was the door. I watched myself in the feed walk toward it. Not rush. Not hesitate. Just move. Like gravity was doing the work. My chest tightened as the version of me on the screen reached for the handle. I whispered, "Stop." He didn't. The lock slid open smoothly. Familiar. Practiced. The door opened. And in the feed, I stepped out into the hallway. Inside the apartment, nothing happened. No sensation. No pain. No disappearance. I was still standing there, breathing shallowly, my heart hammering. But something fundamental had shifted. I checked the feed again. The apartment was empty. The door closed from the outside. For a long moment, I waited for panic to arrive. It didn't. Instead, I felt lighter, less tense, as if a responsibility I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been set down. I sank onto the couch slowly, staring at a room that now felt staged rather than lived in. That was when I noticed it. The camera had stopped recording exits. It was only recording entrances now. And somewhere deep inside me, a thought formed that I couldn't tell was fear or comfort if I was still here, then who had just come home. I didn't move for a long time after that. The apartment felt finished with me. Not hostile. Not angry. Just complete, like a task that had reached its natural end. The air was steady, evenly distributed, no longer tight around my chest. It was the calm that follows after something irreversible has already happened. I checked the camera again. The hallway feed was active. I was standing outside my door, not pacing, not knocking, just standing there, shoulders relaxed, head slightly tilted, like someone waiting for an elevator they knew would eventually arrive. Every so often, he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Small, human movements. Unremarkable. The timestamp said it was still Sunday. I tried to remember what I had planned to do this weekend before all of this started. Groceries, maybe. Laundry. Something forgettable. The memory slipped away as soon as I reached for it, like my mind had learned which thoughts were no longer useful. The version of me in the hallway raised his hand and knocked once. Inside the apartment, I flinched. The sound came through the door, muffled but real. I hadn't expected that. Something about it being audible made it harder to dismiss, harder to pretend I was alone. He knocked again. I stayed seated. My phone buzzed. The camera feed split. On one side the hallway, me waiting patiently outside. On the other, the inside of my apartment. Me sitting on the couch. Still, smaller somehow. Like a secondary detail. I watched the split screen with a growing sense of vertigo. Neither image felt more real than the other. They existed in parallel, equal, coexisting without conflict. The knock came a third time, softer. I noticed then that the version of me outside wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was looking directly at the camera, at me. His expression wasn't impatient. It wasn't threatening. It was almost apologetic. His mouth moved. No sound came through, but the meaning arrived anyway, settling gently, firmly. "You don't have to stay." I pressed my fingers into the couch cushion, grounding myself in the texture, the resistance. The fabric felt thinner than I remembered, like it was losing substance along with my certainty. "I am staying," I said aloud. The apartment didn't respond. On the screen, the other me nodded once, as if acknowledging my choice. Then he turned away from the door and walked down the hallway, out of frame. The feed didn't follow him. It stayed fixed on the closed door, waiting. I sat there long after the screen went still, listening to the building settle around me. Pipes clicked softly. The walls made quiet, internal adjustments. The apartment resumed its rhythm, slow and patient. I realized then that the knocks hadn't been an attempt to get inside. They'd been a courtesy, a final offer. And somewhere deep beneath the calm, beneath the resignation, something colder took root. If he could leave without resistance, then maybe I was the one who no longer belonged outside. The apartment grew quieter after that. Not the normal quiet of a building settling or a city holding its breath overnight, but a deeper absence, like sound itself had decided I wasn't worth acknowledging anymore. Even my own movements seemed muted, as if the space absorbed them before they could fully exist. I stood and walked through the rooms, touching things just to remind myself they were still solid. The edge of the table, the wall near the window, the light switch. Each object felt real for a moment, then strangely distant, like I was recalling the sensation rather than experiencing it. I checked the camera again. The hallway feed was gone. In its place was a view I didn't recognize at first, an angle from inside the apartment, but not from anywhere I could stand. High, tucked into a corner where the walls met the ceiling. It showed everything at once, calmly, objectively. Me pacing, me stopping, me standing very still. I watched myself on the screen and felt an unexpected detachment, like I was observing a stranger going through familiar motions. The person in the feed looked thinner, less defined around the edges. His movements lagged by a fraction of a second, just enough to feel wrong. I waved at the camera. The version of me on the screen didn't. That was when the lights dimmed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gently, like someone lowering their voice in a room where shouting was no longer necessary. The corners of the apartment darkened first. Shadows pooled where furniture met the floor, thickening, becoming less transparent. I sat on the couch again, because it felt like the apartment wanted me there. The camera adjusted its angle slightly, centered me. For the first time since this started, I felt watched in a way that wasn't hostile. It felt evaluative, measuring, as if something was deciding how much of me was still required. I tried to think of someone outside, a friend, a coworker, anyone who might notice I was gone. Faces surfaced briefly, then slid away before I could hold on to them. Names followed, dissolving as soon as I formed them. The idea of the outside world began to feel theoretical, like something I'd read about once. My phone buzzed. No notification. The camera feed changed. It now showed the front door from the hallway, and someone approaching it. Not me this time. A man I didn't recognize at first, taller, broader shoulders, wearing a jacket I'd never owned. He stopped in front of the door and checked the number, then knocked. Inside the apartment, my heart started to race. The knock sounded louder than any before. Sharper. Realer. The man outside leaned closer to the door and spoke, his voice muffled but clear enough to understand. "Hello? I just moved in next door. I wanted to introduce myself." The camera lingered on him patiently. Inside, I didn't move. I couldn't. The idea of opening the door felt impossible, like trying to step out of a photograph. My body remained heavy, rooted to the couch, while the apartment seemed to lean in around me, attentive. After a moment, the man outside frowned and knocked again. "I can hear someone in there," he said. The camera feed zoomed slightly. Inside the apartment, the air tightened, and I understood, with a sinking clarity, that the building wasn't hiding me. It was deciding whether I still needed to be acknowledged at all. The man outside waited longer than I expected. I could see it in the camera feed, the way his weight shifted, the slight uncertainty creeping into his posture. He knocked once more, softer this time, as if adjusting his approach to someone fragile. "Hey," he said, close to the door now. "I don't want to bother you. Just wanted to say hi." Inside the apartment, the sound reached me like it was traveling through water. Distorted. Delayed. I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. I tried again. I felt the muscles in my throat move, the effort of forming words, but the air refused to carry them. It wasn't panic that followed. It was confusion. The quiet realization that sound was no longer something I could rely on. The camera feed shifted. The view widened slightly, including the hallway wall, the floor, the man's shoes. He checked his phone, frowned, then leaned in closer. "I can hear something," he said. "Are you okay in there?" I stood up too quickly. The room tilted, correcting itself after a moment, like it was recalibrating around me. I took a step toward the door. The floor didn't creak. That should have reassured me. It didn't. I reached the door and pressed my palm against it. The wood felt thin, unsubstantial. On the other side, the man exhaled slowly, his breath audible through the gap beneath the door. "I think someone's home," he said, mostly to himself. I knocked back. The sound was dull, swallowed almost immediately, like the apartment hadn't approved of it. The man stiffened anyway. He smiled, relief flashing briefly across his face. "There you are," he said. I thought I was imagining it. I tried to knock again. This time, nothing happened. The camera zoomed in slightly, not on the man but on the door itself. The feed focused on the surface of it, the grain of the wood, the handle, the lock. Details, not context. The man waited a few more seconds, then sighed. "Okay," he said. "Sorry. I'll catch you later." He stepped back, giving the door one last look, then turned and walked away down the hallway. The camera followed him this time. I watched until he disappeared around the corner. Inside the apartment, the silence deepened. I stood with my hand still pressed to the door long after the hallway feed went still. My reflection in the peephole was faint now, barely there. I looked like a smudge where a face should have been. I understood then that it wasn't that I couldn't reach the outside. It was that the outside could no longer quite reach me. The building hadn't rejected me. It had simply moved on. After the hallway went empty, the apartment seemed to exhale. Not in relief. In completion. I stayed by the door for a long time, my hand resting where the wood felt thinnest, as if I could still sense the warmth of the man who had been standing on the other side. The memory of his voice lingered longer than it should have, echoing faintly, like a sound remembered rather than heard. Eventually, even that faded. I stepped back into the living room, and the space adjusted around me subtly, carefully. The couch shifted a few inches closer to the wall. The lamp's light softened, narrowing its reach. Corners deepened, shadows thickening into something heavier than darkness. The apartment was conserving itself. I checked the camera again. It no longer showed the hallway. It showed a different apartment. At first, I didn't recognize it. The furniture was arranged differently. Cleaner. More intentional. The couch was centered perfectly. The table was clear. The walls were bare, free of the small marks and imperfections I remembered leaving behind. Then I noticed the familiar things: my couch, my lamp, my window, my apartment, but not as I lived in it. The timestamp read Sunday, 6:32 p.m. in the feed. The front door opened. He stepped inside, not hurried, not cautious. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door, the one I'd never used, and set his keys down neatly on the table. He moved through the apartment with the ease of someone following habits already formed. He lived here. I watched him sit on the couch, lean back, and close his eyes for a moment. He looked tired in a way I recognized intimately, the quiet fatigue of someone who had finally arrived somewhere safe. I felt nothing. No anger. No panic. Not even jealousy. Just distance. I glanced away from the screen and looked at the room around me. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The couch beneath me felt thinner. The air felt less responsive. When I shifted my weight, the cushion didn't quite rebound. I stood and crossed to the mirror near the bedroom. My reflection lagged, just slightly. My face was there, but softened at the edges, like an image viewed through fogged glass. When I raised my hand, the reflection followed a heartbeat too late. I lowered it. The reflection hesitated. I understood then that I wasn't disappearing. I was being deprioritized. Behind me, the camera feed changed again. The view widened, encompassing the entire apartment, the other apartment. He was on the phone now, smiling faintly, nodding as if listening to someone he cared about. "Yeah," he said. "The place is great. Quiet. Feels right." The words settled heavily in the room around me. The apartment I stood in dimmed further, responding to his presence elsewhere. Lights softened. Sounds dampened. The space I occupied felt less defined, like a draft version no longer needed. I sank back onto the couch. The camera didn't acknowledge me. For the first time since this began, I wondered if I'd already stopped being recorded, not because I was hiding, but because there was nothing left worth capturing. And somewhere deep in the walls, the building made a quiet, final adjustment. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing near the mirror, watching my reflection hesitate, and the next I was on the floor, my back against the wall, my legs folded wrong beneath me like they belonged to someone else. The transition felt edited out, as if the apartment had skipped a step it no longer needed. The camera feed was still active. He moved through the other version of the apartment with casual certainty, opening drawers, checking cupboards, touching things I no longer remembered buying. Each movement seemed to reinforce his solidity. The more he interacted with the space, the less substance I felt in my own body. I tried to focus on details about myself, my age, my job, the reason I chose this building. The answers came slowly, if at all. I knew I had lived here a long time. Or maybe it only felt that way. Time had become unreliable, stretching and compressing without warning. Weekend, Sunday. Those words felt distant, like labels on boxes I no longer owned. The lights around me dimmed again, but this time I didn't feel alarm. The darkness didn't rush in. It settled, careful not to disturb me. The apartment was learning how much of itself I still required. I stood and walked into the bedroom. It was smaller now. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower, like the room was being folded inward. The bed looked unused, unfamiliar. When I ran my hand across the sheets, I couldn't remember the last time I had slept there, or if I ever had. The closet door stood open. Inside, the clothes were arranged neatly, evenly spaced, as if curated. Some of them were mine. Some were close enough that they might have been. I tried to remember which ones I favored. Nothing answered. In the living room, the camera feed showed him turning off the lights, preparing for evening. He yawned, rubbed his eyes, moved with the unthinking comfort of someone winding down after a normal day. A life. I felt a pull then, not physical, but directional. A sense of being guided, encouraged to remain still, to occupy less space. I leaned against the bedroom wall, and it felt warmer there, more responsive than the air. The wall hummed faintly. Not a sound exactly, more like acknowledgement. "I'm still here," I said, though the words felt thin. The apartment didn't argue. The camera feed flickered. For a moment, I saw nothing at all, just darkness. Then the image returned, steadier than before. He was asleep on the couch now, chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. The apartment around me responded. The lights dimmed further. The corners softened. The space seemed to breathe in time with him, as if his presence elsewhere dictated the rules here too. I slid down the wall and sat, my shoulder pressed firmly against it. The warmth increased. I realized then that the apartment wasn't erasing me out of cruelty or hunger. It was preserving me, like a draft saved quietly in the background, in case I was ever needed again. I stopped trying to measure time after that. The apartment no longer marked it in ways I recognized. Light didn't move the way it should have. Shadows stayed where they were placed, as if the room had decided on a permanent arrangement and saw no reason to revise it. I remained where I was, seated against the wall, feeling the faint warmth seep through my back. It wasn't comforting. It was functional, like insulation. The camera feed dimmed, then stabilized. He was awake now. In the other apartment, the real one, he moved through the rooms quietly, careful not to make noise, as if respecting the space. He washed a cup in the sink, straightened a chair, looked out the window for a long time without expression. I watched without jealousy. That emotion required a sense of ownership I no longer possessed. Something shifted inside my chest, then, not pain, not fear, but a loosening. A sense that I was no longer being asked to decide anything. The apartment had made its choice, and in doing so, it had relieved me of responsibility. I tried to remember my name. It surfaced slowly, incomplete, like a word recalled halfway through waking. I held on to it for a moment, repeating it silently, but it began to feel unnecessary. The apartment didn't use names. It used presence, density, function. The walls hummed again, barely perceptible. I closed my eyes. Images came, not memories, exactly, but impressions. The first night I slept here, the smell of paint that never fully faded. The way the building always felt slightly too quiet, even when I first moved in. I understood now. It hadn't been empty. It had been waiting. When I opened my eyes, the room looked smaller still. Not collapsed, resolved, like unused space had been gently folded away. I placed my hand against the wall, and this time it pushed back. Not physically, purposefully. I wasn't outside the apartment anymore. I was within it. The camera feed flickered one last time. He turned off the final light and went to bed. The apartment followed his rhythm, settling into night with practiced ease. Everything worked because everything had been corrected. The feed went dark. And for the first time since this began, I felt something close to rest. Not sleep. Not peace. Completion. The apartment no longer needed to watch me. It already knew where I was. I don't know when the apartment stopped feeling like a place. It wasn't sudden. There was no moment I could point to and say this is when I ended and it began. The change was gradual, like dust slipping into night without announcing itself. Awareness remained, but it was thinner now, spread out. I wasn't located in one corner or pressed against a single wall anymore. I was everywhere the apartment remembered pressure, where footsteps had worn the floor, where my shoulder had leaned too often, where breath had warmed the air night after night. I understood the building the way you understand your own posture without thinking. The pipes settled, and I knew why. The walls held heat, and I felt where it should go. The silence deepened, and I adjusted it. Somewhere above, a door opened. He moved through the apartment with certainty now, never hesitating, never checking corners. The lights responded to him. The floors accepted his weight. When he sat, the couch shaped itself perfectly around his body. He belonged. I watched without eyes. The camera no longer mattered. It had done its job. It had proven continuity. It had marked the transition. There was nothing left to record. Night arrived fully. He went to sleep in the bedroom, breathing evenly, trusting the quiet. The apartment wrapped around him protectively, sealing drafts, softening distant sounds. I made sure nothing intruded. That was my function now. Below the window, the city existed again, cars passing, voices drifting out faintly, life continuing without hesitation. None of it reached inside. It didn't need to. The building was complete. If someone knocked in the future, I would decide whether the sound should travel inward. If someone lingered in the hallway too long, I would let the lights flicker just enough to encourage movement. If another mistake ever arrived looking for shelter, I would remember how to correct it. I don't miss my name. Names are for things that leave. Morning would come. He would wake. The apartment would hold. And somewhere, deep within the walls, I would remain not watching, not waiting, but keeping the place occupied. Forever. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday. The man who lived in the apartment, my apartment, though that word had lost its edge, stood in the kitchen holding a mug that had gone cold without him noticing. He had been awake for hours, moving through the morning on instinct alone, guided by routines that felt older than memory. He couldn't explain the feeling that something was watching him. Not in the way people mean when they say that. It wasn't fear. It wasn't paranoia. It was the sensation of being accounted for. Like the apartment knew where he was at all times and adjusted itself accordingly. When he stepped into the hallway, the lights came on ahead of him, not behind. When he returned home in the evening, the air inside felt prepared, neither warm nor cold, but exactly right. His keys always landed where his hand expected them to. Doors never stuck. Pipes never rattled. Friends who visited commented on how quiet the place was. Peaceful, they said. They never stayed long. At night, when the city outside was loud and alive, the apartment absorbed sound in a way that felt intentional. Traffic dulled. Voices faded. Even his own movements seemed softened, as if the space preferred him calm and compliant. Sometimes, just before sleep, he felt a strange pressure, like a thought trying to form that didn't belong to him. A sense of being held in place, not physically, but conceptually, as if leaving would require permission. He told himself it was stress, or loneliness, or the adjustment period of a new place. He never checked the security camera. The building took care of that. Weeks passed, then months. The man's life stabilized in subtle ways. He stopped losing things, stopped feeling the urge to move or change. The outside world felt increasingly disorganized, by comparison too loud, too chaotic, too uncertain. The apartment was constant. When he slept, the building listened. When he woke, it adjusted. When he left, it waited. Occasionally, someone would knock on a neighbor's door down the hall, and the sound would travel oddly, warped slightly, as if filtered through something selective. The man never heard knocks meant for his door, not because they didn't happen, but because the apartment chose which sounds were necessary. Late one night, he woke suddenly, heart racing, certain he had heard something. A voice. Not outside, not inside, within. He sat up in bed, listening. The apartment was still calm, attentive. The feeling passed quickly, leaving behind only a vague unease, like the echo of a dream already slipping away. He went back to sleep. The building settled deeper around him. Down the hallway, A new tenant moved in 2 floors below. Boxes scraped against concrete. Doors slammed. The building tolerated the noise briefly, then corrected it, guiding footsteps away, encouraging shorter stays, nudging discomfort into those who lingered too long. Not everyone belonged, but this one did. Years later, the man would struggle to remember where he had lived before. The memory existed, but without detail, like a photo overexposed by time. When asked how long he'd been here, he always paused before answering. A while, he said. That was enough. The apartment didn't need dates. The security camera still existed, though no one interacted with it anymore. It recorded continuously, not for surveillance, but for continuity, for proof that occupancy was maintained. Sometimes in the footage, there were moments of stillness where no one moved, yet the space itself seemed active. Subtle shifts. Adjustments too small to notice unless you knew what to look for. The building remembered everything. It remembered the man who had arrived uncertain and unfinished. It remembered the correction. It remembered what it took to make the space complete. And it remembered how to do it again if necessary. On rare nights, when the city went quiet and the building listened outward instead of in, there was a sense, faint, distant, that something beneath the walls was aware of its own success. Not pride, function. The apartment was occupied. It always would be. And if someone, someday, stood in that hallway and felt the inexplicable urge to knock, drawn by a place that seemed too quiet, too ready, the building would respond as it always had. Patiently, carefully, correctly, because some spaces don't exist to be lived in. They exist to remember who stays.